Hi, I'm a geologist from Bowling Green State University, and today I'm going to be reacting to When the Amazon Was a Mega Lake by Extinct Zoo. So let's get this started.
Nature is beyond amazing and all around us. We got deserts, forests, rivers, mountains, oceans. The list is near endless. And while every habitat is breathtaking in its own way, there are those particular places that seem time and time again to captivate people more than normal. And there's perhaps no better example of this than the Amazon rainforest and river, sometimes collectively known as the Amazon Basin. This area is made up of extensive lush rainforests, swamps, and thousands of waterways, providing an abundance of resources, which allows for the existence of some of Earth's most unbelievable life. And its crazy nature has led to it often being touted as the last frontier on land. And this is further reflected by the fact that a poll with over 600 million votes listed it as one of the 7 new wonders of Earth. Impressive, and proof that nearly everyone knows about it. But that said, not all, or dare I say most, realize just how giant it truly is. The rainforest, for starters, is by far the largest in the planet.
That's pretty cool. So I guess like one thing I am curious about with this is this area of light green, like why exactly that's there. Maybe it's just like disputed, like, oh, they think the Amazon rainforest goes from here to here, but this could also be part of it. So pretty good intro so far.
Planet, outcompeting the second place, Congo, by a magnitude of 3. While the Amazon
Oh,
River
that's
is so
crazy.
expansive and powerful that it moves water about 6 times faster than what's seen in any other river on Earth. In fact, you could combine the Nile, Mississippi, Congo, Ganges, Thames, and Yangtze River and still not beat the amount of water the Amazon is moving.
Holy crap,
And due
I
to
didn't
its
know it
sheer
was
size, the Amazon in
that
some
huge.
ways seems eternal, and it's hard to imagine it ever being different. But yet, at one time, it was unrecognizable compared to now. And not just in how the actual landscape looked, but also in the sense of what called it home.
Okay, yeah. So it looks like that.
As if you think the Amazon is scary, the actual landscape.
Okay, yeah, so this is some pretty nice paleo art. So it looks like some of the stuff might be around today, like maybe some of these fish, or I don't know if these are alligators or crocodiles, something like that. But it definitely seems like these mammals up here, this turtle-like thing, maybe this weird like snail on the bottom, that those aren't around here. That those aren't like around today. So it looks pretty interesting, and I really like the depiction. Had a real artist actually draw this, not some AI generated slop.
Looked, but also in the sense of what called it home. As if you think the Amazon is scary today, then boy oh boy, do I have news for you. Because once upon a time and make its present day self look somewhat like a petting zoo. And there is no scarier time in the Amazon's history when it was not a rainforest, but rather a super mega lake, now known as Lake Pebas.
Okay, so now we're actually getting to the meat of the video. This looks pretty interesting and looks like yeah, and for a lake that I would imagine would take up the Amazon, I guess I would always think of it coming from like closer towards the mouth of the river, not like right next to the mountains, but I guess we'll see why exactly that is.
This bonkers realm is believed to have started forming long ago, about 21 million years, give or take, during the Aquitanian. This was the
Aquitanian.
oldest age of the Miocene epoch, and was generally defined as a dry and cool period. But clearly the Amazon didn't get the memo, as it remained relatively
wow.
warm
So many
and
things.
wet by most people's standards.
So much
The climate had a lot
megafauna.
to say in how things operate in these parts. Yet, what was having a far larger impact on the area was the wax and waning of the lands, with tectonic activity causing the Andean mountains to rise up. And their increased elevation eventually got to a point where
Okay,
the
wait,
flow
I'm
along
gonna
the Andean
go back just a
mountains
little bit. Okay, so I think what's going on here is what this is trying to show is apparently there's like okay. Yeah, I guess just generally like tectonic uplift, specifically attached to
rise
the
up.
Andean
And their
mountains.
increased elevation eventually got to a point
Okay.
where the flow of
And one of the things they're showing here that's really interesting is like a huge waterfall, which I know that I think like Victoria Falls is in South America, and I think that that's like one of the world's largest waterfalls. And by the time water actually gets to the bottom, it's just completely turned into it's like completely aerosolized, so it's just like a mist. You know, it's not really like a torrent of water coming down. It's just a mist that's slowly floating down. And I mean, that makes sense with the tectonic stuff they were talking about earlier. If you have a huge tectonic uplift, you could just see areas where the water would normally traverse, but it can't because there's a huge drop-off that was created because the land just got pushed upwards. So pretty interesting stuff. Reminds me of how in some capacity, like how tectonics form things like the Grand Canyon, where you just have an uplift and then the river has that, grind down deeper into the bedrock.
Water was heavily impacted, essentially creating a huge bowl in the west, in which water would get trapped. And thus the region rapidly began to flood and fill up to the brim with water, giving us the Pebos systems. Now,
Okay, yeah. So this looks pretty cool. So it looks like it was actually maybe like somewhat attached to the ocean, depending on exactly how you interpret this. But because I don't know exactly how this thing was draining, but also like whenever you get huge tectonic uplift, one thing that tends to cause is at least relative subsidence. Next to this huge area that's moved up, there tends to be lower areas, like relatively close to it, where sediments fill in, or water many times also fills in too. So you can see like lake deposits, like a bunch of, maybe depending on the circumstance, maybe oil, maybe fossils, a lot of cool stuff.
Oh, I did say this area was a super lake. Yet the nuanced answer is that we aren't too sure as to what exactly this region really looked like.
Oh,
We know
okay.
it was wet, surely.
So-
However, the question is, was it one massive lake, multiple lake systems, or a giant marsh, or something in between? And that's where it gets hazy, with one of the more accepted hypotheses being that it was a mega wetland, with loads of varying environments. Whatever the case though,
That'll make it a little less fun.
as the Lake Pebos system at its peak was larger than present-day Japan, and in certain areas
Oh,
could
that's
achieve
crazy.
depths of 50 meters or 150 feet. So for people with
Huge.
thalassophobia, this is rather unwelcome news. And this certainly wasn't helped by the fact that what lived in these waters consisted of what I would tentatively dub non-human friendly life. And honestly, gave the Western Interior Seaway, i.e. the Earth's deadliest sea, a run
Yeah,
for its money.
they call that the
'Cause
Great
if I had
Carbonate
to
Bank.
choose across either one,
So many
I'm not
limestones.
exactly sure which one I would choose, which is saying something. Additionally, like the Western Interior Seaway, the Pebos mega wetland had phases to it, some of which were more chill and others more nope. And there is a clear time when it reached the peak nopeness, which was the Middle Miocene. This was a very important part in Earth's natural history as a whole.
I was gonna talk
Yet,
about like
it was
the
really an event in the midst
yeah,
of this
the
age that mattered
mid-Miocene
most,
climate
the
optimum.
MMCO, or the Middle Miocene Climatic Optimum, an interval wherein temperatures worldwide rose, with the average temp being about 3 to 4 degrees Celsius warmer than the present, which for perspective would be kind of like going from Portugal to Syria. And based on present measurements, Lake Pebos would have been comparable to the top 5 current hottest countries. So you definitely want to bring some refreshment and a lot of sunscreen. This heat wave is believed to have stemmed from an elevation in atmospheric carbon dioxide, and might have also fed the vegetation of Pebos, resulting in giant trees, oversized marshes, thick mangroves, the lot.
Yeah, so one thing that he's talked about here a little bit that's really interesting is about how increased CO2 levels impact vegetation. So one of the limits on how fast plants can grow today is not actually is many times not like the amount of sunlight they're getting. It's not the amount of nutrients in the. Sometimes it's not the amount of nutrients in the soil. Sometimes, like a lot of times, it can actually be the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Since the way that your body works is that you breathe in oxygen and release carbon dioxide. The way that plants get carbon to build their bodies is basically taking that carbon dioxide, taking the carbon out of it, and releasing oxygen, like O2. And using that extra carbon that it just took out of the atmosphere to build its body up. So if you have higher amounts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, like a higher concentration, it makes it way easier for plants to build their bodies faster. So pretty interesting
also leading
stuff.
to the largest size for Lake Pebos in terms of maximum reach and water levels. And unsurprisingly, this allowed for an abundance of life to seep in, and cold-blooded animals in particular took a heavy liking to the new heat, which helped not only their diversity levels, but also their sizes. And though the Cenozoic as a whole is often called the age of mammals, Lake Pebos was definitely a place ruled by reptiles. Yet, despite each group of scalies reaping the rewards, so to speak, it was one group in particular that took over, good old crocs. And if you thought Australia, the Everglades, or the Nile has a croc problem, think again, as the Pebos put them to absolute shame, with formations linked to the wetland, indicating a higher diversity seen in crocodilians than even birds. In other words, imagine a place where seeing a bird is more of a rarity than seeing a croc, which I don't know about you guys, but to me, it's probably not the kind of location I'd want to visit. And due to the high number of crocodilians living in Pebos, we see that there are
Terrifying.
many types, with niche partitioning being routinely observed. Along with heavy diversity and niche partitioning, of course, comes great differences of size. And while a few remained within what we would consider the normal limits, a handful evolved into supersized giants. And this included the king of the mega wetland, and what was the largest caiman and possibly the biggest crocodilian to ever live, the Purosaurus. There are no words that capture just how monstrous this behemoth was, but I will try. The first report of its existence comes from 1892, when skull material was located in the Purus region by a team of paleontologists. And the sizes of these skull pieces were nigh
holy crap.
And they instantly knew this was something different, so to
Yeah,
speak.
it feels like
And
dinosaur
subsequent
size
discoveries
almost.
and more material only confirmed this, as what it unveiled was a supercroc that was built like a tank and had proportions off the charts, with the skulls alone measuring 4.7 feet or about 1.5 meters, and being almost comically robust at that, taking on a rather box-like shape. And so clearly from this powerful head alone, the Purosaurus was top dog in Pebos, and a vicious predator at that.
Strong
Although
jaws.
its postcranial size, the body size,
Okay.
is something that not everyone agrees on, as postcranial bones have been rather elusive. But most studies have found that at the very least, they would have measured 9.2 meters or 30 feet long. And
Yeah, so wow, that's crazy. It reminds me of like I don't know, like I don't know how this compares to like a school bus, but wow. Yeah, it's absolutely like humongous. And I mean like I don't know how big the biggest thing on land is today, at least something that's like an animal. But yeah, it definitely at least holds a torch to what we have today, that at least what we humans haven't driven extinct. So it's pretty crazy. Yeah, if humans were around at that time, definitely would have gotten munched by this guy.
weighed over 6 tons, which already greatly exceeds the largest reptiles of today and puts it on par with literal killer whales. But I have to warn you, things only get crazier after this, as these are the more quote-unquote conservative estimates. Other studies have reported theoretical maximums from 33 to 42 or even 52 feet, or 12.5, 10, and 15.8 meters, respectively. Additionally, at these bigger sizes, the weight also balloons, and it's possible that the largest adults weighed between 8.4 and 12.6 tons, which at the latter weight, we are talking about a crocodilian heavier than even a minke whale.
Yeah, so like whenever you get things that are that heavy, especially on like terrestrial settings, it becomes very hard for them to move just because they're so heavy. So usually when you see the biggest things that have ever existed in like Earth's history, that's like a single animal, you know, that's not like some weird colonial organism or like some plant. You know, it's almost always like in the ocean, just because you have the you can use water to like help hold up your absolutely ginormous body.
If true, it would also make the Purosaurus the heaviest crocodilian ever. And though the accuracy of these estimates are kind of hard to assess, separate studies do suggest a high likelihood that the Purosaurus was indeed heavier than the most famous megacrocs, like the Deinosuchus or Sarcosuchus. And given its titanic broad jaws, it would have required a massive neck to support it, not to mention a muscular robust body as well. And given the absurd nature of its jaws, you know this guy had one mean bite, with models implying a bite force of up to 69,000 newtons. Which sounds a lot, and it is, with very few animals having achieved anything even close to this, not even the infamous T-Rex. And at this bite force, it'd essentially be like having a cargo truck dropped on top of you. But instead of tires crushing you, the damage was delivered by dozens of 2-inch or 5-centimeter long teeth that were curved, covered in 2 cutting edges, and thickly conical, allowing for tremendous bites straight onto bone without harming these teeth at all. And due to their shape and design of the skull, it's clear that Purosaurus was a hunter of large vertebrates, who utilized puncturing and holding bites to debilitate and capture prey. And these stats alone make Purosaurus one deadly killer. But things only get worse for the rest of Pebos, as paleontologists reckon that despite its massive weight, this guy retained the classical finishing move seen in many crocodilians. In other words, the death roll. This brutal move is designed to not only subdue, but literally dismember prey, and with modern crocodiles, has been known to rip animals as large as buffaloes to pieces. So I don't want to imagine just how messy a death roll from the Purosaurus would have been. And thus naturally, this reptile was clearly the apex predator, and nothing else we know from the region would be safe from a fully grown one. Which is why it's also so unfair that Purosaurus had impeccable defenses as well, being
Yeah, damn. So I guess like I guess that makes sense. well, I guess it would be really hard to know specifically about what kind of behaviors these guys would have done back then, because we only have like fossils and like scant evidence of their existence, just like some fossil evidence and maybe some context around that. Maybe you can look at like the depositional setting and how it like fossilized and stuff. But especially when it comes to like kill mechanisms, it could. I think it's really interesting that they call back to like the stuff that we have that's evolved from similar lineages to what formed them back then, and to say like, oh, you know, they could have used very similar like attacks and maneuvers to what we see today, which I imagine would be like crazy amount of torque. But I'm also just curious if, since these guys are so much bigger, if they would even need to do that, if they could just chomp down on something and wouldn't necessarily need to roll, you know, that maybe the bite force would maybe be enough to like debilitate them. But it's also like they had different prey back then, so I don't know.
Covered in
Interesting.
thick scales and osteoderms, far greater than the armor seen in any of its descendants, and keeping it well protected from any animals or from its environment, as the waters of Pebas likely were riddled with fallen trees and various debris that could be pointy. And ultimately, the Purosaurus found extreme success with this build, as fossil remains show that it was not concentrated to specific environments within Pebas, but instead lived throughout the entire thing, inhabiting rivers, floodplains, and lake environments. And so, if you saw water run, and you were in said water, well, it was nice knowing ya. But while Purosaurus was to the Pebas Formation what the T-Rex was to Hell Creek, it was by no means the sole crocodilian, nor was it even the only giant one.
Okay, we got
And a
some
testament to
competition.
this is that the Pebas was also home to possibly the largest Gavialid ever. This family is currently only represented by the Gharials and false Gharials, but in ancient Pebas, there was a whole lot more, including Gripposuchus. Now, I'd much rather swim into this guy than a Purosaurus, but to be honest, I'd prefer neither, as this guy was still a giant within its own right. Thus far, 4 species of this genus has been discovered, and the largest by a good margin is the Gripposuchus croizati, a species described in 2009 who seems to have been stuck in the northern tip of Pebas, possibly frequenting both freshwater and coastal environments, giving it access to a diverse range of food, which clearly did wonders for its size, as estimates over 10 meters, or 33 feet long, are very common for matured individuals. Only the Rampasuchus of the same family rivals it in title for the largest gavialid. In seeing this, it's pretty evident that Gripposuchus didn't have many foes either, rather, just a lot of victims. Though I will say, none were probably as large as the prey Purosaurus was going for, since, opposite to the Purosaurus's broad skull, Gripposuchus had evolved an extremely narrow and slender one, leading to a theorized diet heavy in large fish. But given its sheer size, it's quite realistic that the occasional mammal might have been on the menu too. And if this duo of titans didn't seem like
Okay, yeah. So that's interesting. I never really thought about how like the structure of the snout could impact like what things are better suited for eating. I'm not a huge paleontologist, but this is really interesting, and I feel like I'm learning something there. Yeah, but it would make sense, you know, if you had something that's like way thinner, that maybe that would be better for getting a way different type of prey than something that has like a more broad mouth.
enough, there was also a third, stupidly huge croc that completed the Pebas trifecta, and its name, the Morosuchus. Like Purosaurus, it too was a type of caiman, yet these siblings couldn't have been more opposite, with this genus in some ways being closer to ducks, as it sported a broad, flat, and elongated skull that is often described as being duck-like. Sounds funny, but I'd probably never say that to its face, considering that adults in this genus could reach 9.5 meters or 31 feet long, and weigh in excess of 4 tons. So basically 4 giraffes mashed together. And because of this stature plus its odd face, there has been great interest in this mysterious creature's diet, with 3 main hypotheses having been proposed. The first is that it was a generalist eater that patiently waited for animals to drift into its waiting mouth, where it would then swallow them whole. The second option was then a twist. This croc was really a gentle giant who fed on floating plant material. Though to be honest, most are not putting their bets on this idea, with the majority support instead going to the last hypothesis, which is that used its large duck-like mouth to sift through the muddy floors of rivers and lakes in order to uproot and consume a mix of invertebrates, mollusks, crustaceans, and fish. And while it may not be as voracious as its other 2 massive relatives, swimming into one would still not have been good for your heart. This, I guarantee. And just remember, while these 3 were the true giants of Pebas's water, there were still plenty of other crocodilians to go around, with fossil formations revealing the presence of at least a dozen other genera that again demonstrated a wide range in size. And you would have found multiple kinds that rival the largest crocodilians of today, whilst there was also a handful of much smaller genera that were in some cases dog-sized or even smaller. And that might sound good, but what this really means is that every animal in Pebos had a croc designed to hunt them. But as Ian Malcolm so beautifully put it, life, finds a way. And coexisting creatures put up a good fight against these tyrants, using some of that good old gigantism right back at them. Which is why this area also became home to a lot of large fish, including Potamotrigon, that rivaled the heaviest freshwater stingrays on record, and multiple croakers and drums that were human-sized. Yet, the animal that would likely turn the most heads in these waters, which wasn't a croc, was actually a turtle. Though I frankly think calling it a kaiju makes a bit more sense, because it was the biggest freshwater turtle of all time, and one of the biggest, period, the Stupendimus.
Okay, yeah, so, I don't know exactly why, but this gives me like a huge, when I was a kid, I used to see a ton of like huge snapping turtles, so I just imagine like one of those that would take up like an entire like small room. Would probably have like a crazy bite force. So I guess like one thing I'm curious about with this is like how exactly if there were any like I don't know like battles between these guys and some of the crocodilians, because I imagine with such a thick shell that's part of like the why it evolved that way. So pretty interesting stuff. And I am curious, if there's like, if they preyed on each other much, or like, I guess like, how the top predator, or who exactly the top predator, for some of those times was expected to be. Imagine it's like one of the crocodilians, but maybe it was a huge turtle.
Don't let this name confuse you, as it has nothing to do with being stupid, besides perhaps your expression when seeing one, but 100% to do with it being stupendous, which is what sums up this reptile, who even gave the likes of the Archelon a run for its money, as its carapace alone was in some cases 2.86 meters or 9.4 feet. And remember, this was the shell, not the entire body. So it comes as no surprise that it was also quite hefty, being over 1 ton. And it's possible that these extreme proportions were essentially forced upon the turtles by the threat the crocs posed, and the enormous shell would have certainly come in handy when traversing these waters. And we even have direct evidence of this, as multiple specimens from Pebos have been found with bite marks in their carapace, as well as actual embedded teeth that were crocodilian in nature.
That's what I was curious about.
I expect that not every turtle was this fortunate, but at least in these cases, it seems like the XXL shells did the trick, helping their
pretty good
victims
defense, I guess,
survive and fight another day. Now, I don't know about you guys, but seeing a mega-sized turtle would certainly check a few time-traveling boxes for me. But this is one flippered animal you definitely would want to observe only from a safe distance away, as while we generally think of turtles as being harmless, cute creatures, for the most part, the Stupendimus was a feisty guy. It possessed a hunkering beak that was curved and hard, allowing it to snip and crunch various items.
Okay, so this guy...
a durophagous omnivorous diet that was rather generalistic in nature.
Okay, so it's saying he was like an omnivore, which I feel like makes sense, because at least to my knowledge, a lot of turtles are like that today.
And given
I don't know
size,
too much.
Fish, mollusks, smaller crocodilians, and snakes were all likely game. And the defiance to their crocodilian rulers
carnivore?
among the turtles
did
not end at Stupendimus either, as another large-bodied genus lived alongside it, the Caninimus. It was a smaller genus than Stupendimus, that was somewhat similar in size to leatherback sea turtles. So,
very defensive.
Not massive, but still definitely not pet-sized. And it would have been even less optimal for house living considering its bad temper, since Caninimus was highly aggressive and carnivorous. This notion stems from its hooked jaw that was stout, robust, and had curves along it similar to what's seen in the alligator snapping turtle. And thus the belief is that this was just one big old snapping turtle. Albeit, opposed to the risk of losing a hand, you'd be at risk of losing your entire legs, arms, and maybe even head from a bite. And it likely fed on anything it found, except for perhaps giant crocodilians. But who knows? Perhaps it tried. And so, when even the turtles are unhinged, you know a place is messed up. But don't forget, you also had the usual nightmare suspects. In other words, sharks. Now granted, these cartilaginous fish seem to have been extremely rare in the Pebos overall, and limited to the regions closer to the coasts, that were likely brown.
Yeah, I mean, so one thing I am really curious about with Lake Pebos is it seems like at least when I saw the drawings, that there was a connection between the ocean and then Lake Pebas. So I guess it does make me kind of curious, how much water flow you had going either from Lake Pebas to the ocean, or if you had a little bit of like water inflow from the ocean to Lake Pebas, because that would impact like the salinity, which impacts like what kind of stuff can exist there. And when I think of sharks generally, I think of things that are generally like more saltwater oriented. So I don't know. I'm sure there are some freshwater sharks that at least have exist somewhere in the geologic record, but it's probably like a really interesting, if it hasn't already been investigated, like a really interesting research question, like, oh, does Lake Pebas have like a ton of saltwater critters coming in from the ocean, or is the lake just draining out into the ocean, so it's harder for things to come in from the ocean, so it evolved like completely differently. So, yeah, really interesting stuff. Makes me ask a ton of questions.
Brackish and exposed to periodic marine incursions, which are known to certainly have happened, that were likely brackish and exposed to periodic marine incursions, which are known to certainly have happened.
Okay, so he's saying it's brackish and there were some marine incursions, so it's like a mix of salt and fresh water, at least in some places, it seems.
And so this was just one more thing to worry about. And this is why it's seriously impressive that aquatic mammals managed to show up here in any amount, despite their relatively cold-blooded onslaught, with the two main mammalian groups in the Pebas waters being Sirenians and river dolphins. At least multiple species of each coexisted with the reptiles and fish, and like those groups, also ranged in size. For the Sirenians, they could be quote-unquote fun-sized, all the way to the sizes seen in the extant manatees, while the dolphins, on the other hand, tended to swing larger, and actually got in on that good old gigantism from time to time, as it was here that the biggest river dolphin of all time lived, the Pebanista.
Ooh, he looks so
Today,
creepy.
that title for the largest river dolphin goes to the Amazonian river dolphin, that coincidentally lived in a corresponding area, and whose adults measure up to 8.5 feet and weigh about the same size as a gorilla, which is respectable. Yet, it has to beef up a bit more if it wants to catch up to the Pebanista, who is about 30 to 35% larger on average. And similar to the other inhabitants in the Pebas, the Pebanista also became a bit more menacing than its living relatives. And we know this thanks to the unique construction of its skull, which compared to extant river dolphins was unusually sturdy and sported relatively longer and thicker teeth. What's more is that its snout was oddly elongated, yet wouldn't have been flimsy or fragile, instead being sturdy and capable of enduring high stresses due to the robustness of its overall skull. And then on top of that, the postcranial skeleton featured many attachment points for muscles. So in other words, we had a dolphin Chad on our hands. And paleontologists do agree that the Pebanista practiced a raptorial lifestyle that was supported by the cetacean's hallmark OP ability, echolocation, which would have proved wonders for Pebanista, as the development,
I wonder how
or rather
they
reduction in their
knew
eyes,
that.
reflected the Pebas was mainly composed of highly muddied waters, where visibility was very low, and thus things like echolocation would have been phenomenally useful. And it is this fact that really gives me the
Interesting.
heebie-jeebies. That fact being that the Pebas was essentially a giant murky swamp. Imagine that for a second. You could be just minding your own business, paddling out on a little canoe, and peer over the side and see absolutely nada, just a dark abyss, while unbeknownst to you, multiple predators over 1 ton could be lurking just an arm's reach beneath you. Yeah, no thank you. Here's the problem though. Staying away from the water is not a foolproof plan to survive in the prehistoric Amazon, as the land was also home to its own nightmares as well. From formation sediment, it seems like the majority of vegetation and habitats in the system, plus its immediate surroundings, was a mix of rainforests, palm swamps, normal swamps, ferns, and open flooded areas where aquatic plants are
Okay,
abundant.
there's probably at
And
least
this
some
might sound
cool,
lush
or
and
cool
picturesque,
like peat
but
there.
don't be fooled. All this vegetation did was make it easier for terrestrial scaries to hide. And in Pebas, there were 2 families in particular that were essential to keep an eye out for: the Sebacids and forest racids.
Okay, yeah, so what's fun about these guys up at the top, the Sebacids, feels like a mix between like a crocodile and like maybe some like some like lizards, kind of like a Gila monster is kind of like the vibe it's giving me. And then these guys down here reminded me the most of things kind of like emus or ostriches. So I wonder if how closely those are related. I'm sure he's going to get into that.
Both of these groups were like the biggest terrors in the water, i.e. reptiles, kind of. So again, so much for the age of mammals. But I guarantee you that you would not be mixing these two up. For the sabekids were a group of typically large, ferocious croc-like crocodilomorphs who hunted utilizing powerful skulls, jaws, and teeth, which were actually more similar to those of giant meat-eating theropods than to other crocodilians. Oh, and they also had long limbs, allowing them to run. Yeah, run. And unlike what we've been programmed to believe about crocodilomorphs,
Oh, that's crazy.
these guys were completely terrestrial. So in other words, they probably ran fast at that. And then you had the forest
Those
rapids,
don't exist
or
anymore.
the terror birds. So, technically reptiles, in a sense, who were, as the nickname suggests, predatory birds, albeit flightless.
Holy crap. Yeah, at least the way this guy's body is structured makes me think of like a kiwi. There was like a video going around Discord of like a kiwi jumping around. Totally could see this guy doing that, except way more terrifying.
Ones, but were a bit too oversized to be confused for a chicken, and lacked the same type of teeth as seen in sabekids, but still were able to kill plenty thanks to their exceedingly durable, sharp curved beaks, as well as their long legs that granted them immense speeds while chasing down prey. So imagine Roadrunner, but multiplies deadliness by 100. Now both the terror birds and sabekids were not new news in prehistoric South America, as well before the Pebas system they were around. Yet, the wetlands really brought out the worst in them, because it was in the Pebas that the largest of each of these families lurked. For the sabekids, this was the infamous Barinasuchus, an animal who needs little introduction, and the adults could reach 7.5 meters or 25 feet long. In other words, greater than the
he
length seen
stands
in the
so
longest
tall.
modern crocodilians. And just to remind you again, these guys are running, not swimming, which is only more impressive when you consider that they also weighed about 2 tons, thanks to their build and armor. And to make matters worse, there are even more extreme estimates, which suggest that 10 meters, or 33 feet, was also within the realm of possibility, which would be like stacking 3 rhinos standing back to back. Now I will say, subsequent studies have typically stated lower estimates, but in either case, the Barinasuchus remains the largest known sabekid, as well as a very strong contender for the biggest land predator to have ever lived since the freaking dinosaurs. Talk about an achievement. And so given this, the Barinasuchus did obviously blow away the competing terror birds in the wetlands. Yet, the birds did muster a respectable fight, as recovered bones from the region showed what is among the largest terror bird ever. A for now unidentified species that would have stood at 2.5 meters or over 8 feet, making it not only taller than the likes of Shaq, but also one of the tallest birds of all time. And given its vertical exceptionality, this bird would have been a hefty fellow too, weighing around the same as a lion. And for me, this would make me want to skip seeing this guy on a time trip vacation. But for others in Pebas, their size just made them more appetizing, despite the fact that they were also terrestrial apex predators, as terror bird bones have been found riddled in bite marks, indicating that it became someone's KFC. And the culprit? Our old pals, the Megacrocs. So yeah, I think we're gonna have to take our chances on land.
Yeah.
And yet, they still are not good odds.
Yeah, the ecosystem must have been really complex, especially with like all these huge predators and the dynamics between them. Because it seems like they actually would fight with each other and like battle with each other, and then they would survive and wear scars, and then the scars deposited in the geologic record. So battle of all against all, I guess.
Beyond the larger sabekids and terror birds, you also had the smaller, more diverse members too, such as the Langstonia and multiple unidentified terror birds, plus some unwelcomed faces that are still present in the Amazon, namely a variety of boa constrictors. So with all this said,
that's cool.
this area is without a doubt exceedingly unhinged, even for a prehistoric environment. I mean, think about it. In one spot, you can find the largest river dolphin, turtles, caiman, gaviolid, and land predators since the dinosaurs, all in one spot. Most places would be considered crazy for just having one of these things, let alone all of them. And given this, it's seriously impressive that besides terrifying predators, herbivores existed too, and were unsurprisingly the most widespread animals in this part, represented by none other than us. Well, mammals. In the waters, our diversity wasn't exactly the most impressive, even making the extant mammals in the Amazon seem rather mundane and boring. For instance, today one of the otter creatures in the Amazon is the capybara, the biggest living rodent on Earth, which loves swimming, lives by the water, and is actually semi-aquatic. So pretty interesting. But back during the Middle Miocene, these guys had not yet come along. But in their place were other rodents, including in Pebas, the Phobaramus, a grass grazer who is a relative of modern-day guinea pigs. But that's where the similarity stops, as it cannot be farther from them in size, being more similar in that department to polar.
It's like a bear. Holy crap. Yeah, I can see the resemblance between that and like a capybara and a lot of other mammals. Looks like a huge rat.
Making it among the largest rodents of all time.
rodents.
Meanwhile, the Paybus system would have been home to an absurd amount of ground sloths too. A group of unfortunately now extinct sloths that were far more agile,
Yeah,
active,
I think
and terrestrial than
I think
living
early
ones,
humans
and who
helped kill
also
off
tended
those
to be
guys.
more unusual in stature. In Paybus, their level of diversity was off the charts. We are aware of at least 10 different genera that call this place home, and would have offered the perfect mount lineup. For across the bunch, there are species akin in size to large dogs, pigs, deer, and even elephants, at least Asian elephants, as the ground sloth, Eurymachwea, is believed to have weighed up to 4 tons. In addition, 1+ ton neo-ungulates would have been a common sight as well, plus animals that superficially resembled bisons and rhinos, but just lacked horns. Then moving on to some of the more funky looking life, you also had a mix of glyptodonts, Lytopterna, and of course, anteaters, who are actually deceitfully large, and hard to miss given their highly elongated tongues, strange eating manners, and highly modified skulls that honestly look like they are missing a part. And if you think you can't take any more new animals, then hold on to your horses, because I can't let you go without mentioning that primitive primates, bats, Astrapotheria, Metatherians, and Chiroptera were all out in this mega wetland, repping us mammals as well. So by now you should have gotten the memo that Lake Paybos was one heck of a place, and maybe a tad bit too much for nature to handle, as obviously many walks of life I just mentioned do not exist anymore, nor does obviously the mega wetland. So what exactly happened? How does such an expansive environment disappear? Well, just like the Andes giveth, so do.
Yeah, so I imagine here when he's talking about kind of like the end of the Paybos ecosystems, I imagine like part of what's going to happen is whenever you have an uplift, I think what he was talking about earlier is whenever you have a huge like uplift, a lot of times there's subsidence, and this allows like water to precipitate and fill that area in and create like new depositional environments with like lakes and swamps and that sort of stuff. But I imagine since the tectonic activity stopped allowing those ecosystems to exist. The basins, so the areas where the water was, slowly filled in with all the sediment that's coming from all these other places. Maybe a bunch of plants took carbon out of the atmosphere, they died, and then piled into the bottom of this thing. And I imagine it just kind of filled up. So I'm going to see if that's kind of what he's going for here.
They taketh. And during this whole time, they kept rising up and up and up, eventually reaching a point where instead of flooding the area like a bowl, the bowl started leaking water out, and the area slowly started to drain, causing immense shifts in the environments that forced animals to move out or disappear. At some point, this uplift of land even ended up blocking what is now known as the Amazon River from flowing into the Pacific, eventually resulting in its flow to do a complete shift. So yes, at one point this iconic river didn't even run the same way as it does now. And over enough time, the Paybus system fully emptied out, until the only remaining water became the Amazon and its tributaries, which have remained to this day. But of course, many of the amazing and terrifying animals that called the system home are no more. But perhaps for the best. Thanks for watching, and until next time, on Extinct Zoo.
Well, that was really good, exceptional video, super high quality. Wow. That was an experience.